Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best united progressive contributors to our movement. This week, like we had done in our previous episode, we're really diving deep on what makes our candidates stand out for being the best for women. And so this week, like we had last week, we had Marianne Williamson supporters. Today, we have a group of Andrew Yang supporters. As a fellow supporter, I'm really excited for this episode, and I'm really happy to have these guests on. They're some of my favorite people within our movement. So I just want to give each of them a moment to introduce themselves. First on, we have Maria. Maria, do you want to let the folks out there know a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how they should reference you? Obviously, Maria, as well as what you do.
Yeah, my name's Maria Gray. She, her, hers. I am 19. I am, like, what do I do? Who's to say? I'm from Portland, Oregon. Did I already say that? I don't know. I'm a poet and I'm an organizer, and assuming assuming I buy a car that isn't broken on Facebook Market, I will be moving to Portsmouth and working with the actual campaign. So.
Oh, congratulations on that. That's exciting to hear. So next on, we have Jess. Jess, do you want to let them know a little bit about yourself, where you're from, as well as what you do?
Sure, sure. I'm officially Jessica Lynn Allen, and my friends and family call me Jess. I am now in Puerto Rico. I've only been here for a few months, and prior to that, I was more like Austin, Texas based, and then Seattle, Washington is kind of where I grew up. So go PNW. And I spend my time in the digital marketing world as well as content creation. I love creating content, and then I dabble over in the blockchain crypto space and like to trade crypto here and there. And I'm a mom of two, so
Very
I
nice.
think that's good for me.
Yeah, very multifaceted talents there. And lastly, we have on Stacy representing our Women's for Yang group. I believe she's traveling, and therefore you're not going to see her full image. Stacy, it's great to have you on. Do you want to let the folks out there know a little bit about yourself, where you're from, as well as what you do?
Sure. I'm Stacy, like Stacy Harris. People can call me whatever they want. And then let's see. I guess I'm mostly from California, but I was born in Portland, Oregon, but I lived in California most of my life, New York City, Atlanta, and now I have a hotel in Panama. Um, so I'm back and forth between Oregon and Panama, the country, not Panama City Beach, Florida. And then I've been involved in women's activism since 2007. Yeah, like just various different organizing things. So yeah,
Very cool.
that's
Well, it's great to have you on, Stacey, and yes, small world with the whole Portland thing. So I think the first important question that we ask of all of you is first, before we get into really the women's issues, I really want to find out how you all came to be supporting Andrew Yang as your first choice of president. Did you have any candidates that previously you were supporting that are running in this election? Maria, was there anyone for you that was prior to Andrew Yang?
I mean, like, Bernie 2016, but also I was born in 2000 and therefore was 16 in 2016, so my opinion didn't really matter. I mean, like, and I was definitely, like, looking into him this election, but I was like, okay, like, cool. It's kind of like, like a 4-year-old model of a computer at this point. I'm like sick, but, like, no, thank you. I don't know. Fuck, never mind. Yeah, I don't know. I liked Marianne until it turned out that she, like, hated disabled people. I liked Julian Castro until he wouldn't stop texting me and also didn't rise in the polls. Yeah, word.
Yeah, no, I don't know the full context of Julian since I've never been on his mailing list, but yes, a lot of these candidates seem very thirsty to get your attention. So I'd be curious, Jess, how did you come to be supporting Andrew Yang as your first choice
I
now?
literally didn't even answer the question. I'm so sorry.
Maria, do you want to get that answer in then?
Yeah,
How'd you get to Andrew?
Yeah, so I was getting to this, but like on some level, but I actually came across him for the first time, like, during the one really shitty debate where, like, everyone was like, "You did terribly," and he was like, "Yeah, I know, right?" Like the one where he was like, "Sorry, what did you say?" And then he was like, "I want to give everyone $1,000 a month," and they were like, "Shut up forever," because, like, I mean, like, I was living paycheck to paycheck over the summer, and, like, I didn't have any fucking money, and, like, I was probably, like, eating like out of like a 2-month-old box of Cheez-Its or something, and I was like, I don't know, like, you know, when you can feel your body just like viscerally yearning for a vegetable. Like, that was me this entire summer, and I was like, I don't know, and it's just like I started seeing ways that like my life could be improved, and I was also working at a nonprofit that works with LGBTQ youth that are at risk in the area, like, and like it just sucks that like the people who are actually doing like all this super good work and super heavy lifting just have like, it's like there's no structural support for like a crowdfunded economy at this point, even though obviously that's like kind of where we're at this point, unless you're like Jeffrey Epstein's friend. Yeah, basically, I don't know. I never thought that the $1,000 a month thing was like a gimmick. I don't know. I was never sort of in the stage one thing that people always talk about. I sort of went straight to like, yeah, why don't we do that already?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people got hooked in, A, from the UBI being his main selling point, but B, I think a lot of people understood like it wasn't like a meritocracy, that all these people that are doing the hard work are really not being rewarded like we say the American dream is actually working. So I think him really talking about how the metrics are all wrong really spoke to a lot of people, that we're not even talking about the important stuff that we need to be. Jess, did you have a similar path that you were kind of considering a couple candidates and then you finally heard Andrew? Or was Andrew your first candidate this cycle?
I would say I assumed Bernie was going to be my first candidate this cycle, and then Scott Santens introduced me to the concept of universal basic income, and I grew up Republican, and so I kind of battled. I was one of those people that battled with Scott. No, that's a dumb idea. It'll make people lazy. And then he convinced me. It really aligned more with my kind of yoga values and the yogi way of thinking, which is humanity and unity. And I was like, okay, all right. So then once Scott, kind of convinced me of that, it was very soon after that I was introduced to Andrew Yang on Twitter. And that was back when he had less than 30,000 followers. And it was just an instant. He was already humanity first. And then I was already sold on UBI. And then he's a tech guy and an entrepreneur. And he was so clear in his policies. It was like, that's it. I'm in. How do I help get this guy elected?
Yeah, I certainly can understand that. Personally, seeing some of Scott's material also is what swayed me as well. Like, I had always kind of liked the concept of UBI, but then I had some questions about Andrew's actual implementation. But Scott really provided some resources that made me more comfortable switching, again, from Bernie like you had. So I'm curious, Stacey, are you similar, that you had some other ideas coming into this election, but then once you really started hearing about Andrew, you were just immediately sold? Or was it a little bit of a longer transition for you?
I didn't have a candidate that I was pumped about for this cycle. I never really do, because I'm more of a political radical than somebody who's engaged in electoral politics. The trajectory my politics had been on for probably, 10 plus years was, I'm opposed to capitalism, I'm opposed to neoliberal globalization. However, I had yet to see anybody formulate a convincing and workable alternative to capitalism and or globalization. Those are things that, if they're going to end, are going to result in massive violence, massive upheaval, and because of the fact that I have half a PhD in history, I do know the history of mass violence and massive, mass revolutionary movements, and how the violence tends to play out, who tends to be the most affected, and so I was really kind of shocked when I found Andrew Yang, because I was like, wait, here's somebody who is trying to reformulate capitalism in such a way that it's less detrimental to human beings' lives. It's likely to prevent some of the mass violence that I saw coming down the pike in this country. I'm mainly concerned for the most vulnerable people in our society, and they tend to get hit the hardest when violence breaks out. And so I was really excited to find somebody who was A, going to provide financial resources to those people, and B, has the potential to head off some of the scarier trends that I saw kind of coming together in society in the U.S. And then the last thing is, I I volunteer at a domestic violence and sexual assault crisis center, and I see what happens when people try to make exit plans from abusive situations. And every single advocate at the center would be absolutely thrilled if they could say to the clients, when you're ready to go and execute your safety plan, here's $1,000 a month, rather than we have to apply for TAMP for you, we have to apply for SNAP for you, we have to da-da-da-da-da before you can even think about leaving this guy. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very true. He really did provide both a simple plan so that people could really understand it. It's not as burdensome for the people who are vulnerable to really get on board with it, but it's also sophisticated enough in its detail to really handle all these different issues that a lot of them are facing. One thing I really wanted to clarify with all three of you is it sounds like you all kind of came in from a point of view that might have supported Bernie in 2016. And so I wanted to really hear what took you away from wanting to be in his camp during this election and move into the Andrew Yang camp. Maria, was there something that just drew you away from Bernie, or was it just Andrew Yang himself being so good?
I mean, like, I don't want to say that, like, none of the stuff that he sort of has in his stump speech is new to me, but, like, I don't know, my dad's, like, a very, like, solemn Filipino man who only smiles when he's mad, and, like, he's been telling me my entire life that robots are going to take my job. Like, he registered my Gmail address the day I was born so some other bitch named Maria Gray wouldn't take it. Like, still didn't get mariagray@gmail.com. And, like, mariagray.com is owned by, some real estate agent who does not know that red and black don't go on the same anything. But, like, anyway... what was the question?
The question was more, was there something specific to Bernie that made you move away from him, or was it really just Andrew Yang who attracted you to him?
I mean, like, Bernie, I don't know, I feel like the options in 2016 there was a much less diverse array of candidates in 2016, and I feel like Bernie was the pretty universal, like, young progressive option, and like, obviously he has done so much for that movement, but, like, the people who grew up watching him do those things all these years, are now at the point where they're on this, like, on the same platforms as him, running for the same positions as him, like, the people who he's like, I don't want to be like, he raised them or whatever, because, like, that's weird, but, like, like, a lot of people cite the fact that, like, he's been, like, championing these things for, like, their entire lives, and I think that Andrew sort of modernizes that, and I mean, like, Bernie is absolutely, like, that his rhetoric is absolutely integral to, like, the 20th century labor rights movement, and, like, like, poor people should have rights movement in general. But, like, I think that Yang is coming at it that like, with a lens that Bernie really can't come at it from. I think they're approaching the same issue from their own specific lenses, and I think Yang's is more adaptable, especially considering, like, rapid technological advancement and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Bernie really was the default alternative option if you weren't really a Hillary Clinton supporter during that election. And so we all, like, naturally say, okay, he was the default, but did he perfectly represent us all? Maybe not. And so when new candidates in a more diverse field come, it does give us some alternatives that might be closer to what we actually believe. Jess, is that kind of similar for you, that you just were kind of default Bernie because he wasn't the Hillary option, he was the clear progressive choice during that cycle, but then we just had someone who was clear to your identity, or was there specifically anything from Bernie that made you want to go away from him?
Yeah, I think what I really loved Bernie because he fought against the 1%, if you will. And I grew up Republican and upper middle class. And then as I went through kind of my, lifetime, I went through poverty and went on welfare, and I got to see the other side of the world. And I was like, oh, that's how it is, And so I really understood what he was fighting for. But what I felt like when I really started to listen to Andrew is that Bernie is very like, the government's going to fix everything. We're going to give everybody free childcare. We're going to give everybody free college. We're going to give everybody free this. We're going to give everybody free that. And it's like, Andrew is, we're going to give everybody free money with a choice. And then they can choose to do what they need to do for their own life. And so I really started to see, excuse me, Bernie, the candidate of labor. He's always talking about, got to represent the workers, got to represent. Okay, what about everybody else is not working?
I don't feel.
And that's what Andrew spoke to, is that it was a complete picture. Andrew spoke about everybody and helping everybody and giving everybody a choice. And Bernie was just very worker focused and government's going to fix everything focused. And I was like, that fits so much better. And so,
Yeah, I understand that. It's a real human empowerment movement, choice, as well as we're not going to have a government administration that you're going to have to go through all the hoops to get your help. We're going to put the help directly in your hand and you can choose how that's allocated. Stacey, is that similar for you, that it was really just a more accurate identification? It wasn't something Bernie did necessarily wrong, but Yang was just more right?
I probably have a different view than the average person on this. I will always be grateful to Bernie for shifting the mainstream political discourse in the U.S. back to the left. However, he is kind of symbolic to me of what I think the general problem in American politics is. There's this split in the left that has to be healed, and it's between people who place class over everything and versus people who place identity over everything. And those two things can be reconciled, but they can't be reconciled by him, because generally what emerged out of 2016 that really put me off was this insistence, especially out of Bernie Bros, I know, was this insistence that, let's deal with class first and then everything else will fall into place, which, having studied the history of Marxist revolutions, I've heard that one before and it doesn't work. So what usually ends up happening is the women join the revolution happens, and then the women are still stuck with the same problems that they had before, or whatever group you want to talk about. So there's this really short book that I highly recommend to everyone called The Twilight of Equality by Lisa Dugan. It's really short. It's like 110 pages. And she describes a 5-step process by which identity politics groups have been co-opted and kind of neutered by a neoliberalism, and how this constant fight between class politics and identity politics is basically what's destroying the left, and that there is a path forward. And the final chapter in that book actually sort of provides an outline for that path forward, which is so close to Yang's vision that I was just like, whoa, this guy sounds like one of my favorite authors, so, yeah, so that's, I really do believe that both class and various marginalized, the concerns of various marginalized communities can be all taken into account at the same time, and that it isn't, and that they're not mutually exclusive, and that anybody who says that they are might have a hidden agenda.
Yeah, no, I can certainly understand that, and I think that's part of the reason why we want to have conversations like we are having today, where we can discuss issues of a specific identity. Yes, a lot of what we kind of cover on this channel tends to be more economics or international politics, etc., but I think we do need to reconcile some of the specific problems that are occurring for identity groups as well, because we're not going to have this complete revolution if we're still having the inequalities between that identity as well. With that being said, I think one candidate who kind of embraced both identity politics as well as this kind of economic revolution, but just in the complete wrong direction, was Donald Trump. I think one of the things that we have seen during his administration is a lack of decorum, at least at a minimum, towards women. But we can also talk about some of the policy aspects as well. I'd be curious for all three of you. Yeah.
There's actually something I forgot to say on that front, is that what people don't seem to realize is that, especially in the past 5 years, while people are railing against identity politics, several new forms of identity politics have emerged, and they're all different groupings of white dudes whose identity revolves around not being in identity politics or opposing identity politics or whatever, or anarcho whatever, or brocialists or whatever. Those are all forms of identity politics, and Trump's base, I'm sorry, but that's a new form of identity politics too, and everybody wants to pretend that it isn't, but it is. Just because the people doing it are white doesn't make it not identity politics.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. I think they really embrace this like quote unquote anti-SJW type of culture, where it's really just saying if you're fighting for justice for groups that are already being oppressed in some way, you're overreacting. But if you're fighting for keeping your culture, apparently, what America they claim as a white Christian nation, then you're not practicing identity politics, you're practicing patriotism. So I think there really is this double standard. So I'd be curious, obviously there's some sentiment that he did badly, but what would you give as an actual grade for Donald Trump specifically for women? Do you think he has been atrocious specifically for women? Is he somewhat redeemable? Where do you fall? Maria, where do you fall for Donald Trump?
Oh my God. Why am I first? Okay, letter grades. I'm going to go with a solid Z. I don't know. I'm not... if you want to know more about this, follow my Twitter, I guess. But because I'm not about to go into detail, but I was assaulted by a bunch of white dudes who essentially were very much just parroting the whole grab them by the pussy rhetoric. It's not I don't know, when people talk about identity politics, having the time to talk about identity politics instead of experiencing the repercussions of identity politics is within itself I don't know, if you have the time and energy to spend on that, then that is something that you should be asking yourself why, Mm-hmm. It's weird because I'm biracial. My dad's Filipino, my mom's white. I grew up upper middle class, not super upper middle class anymore. It'd be like that sometimes. And then I got sick in February or March, and then obviously as soon as you sneeze, all your money just goes a chew all over the place, and you can never get it back. So I don't know. I feel like I sort of am in this weird when it comes to when people talk about identity politics. I literally muted the phrase identity politics on Twitter this morning because I was I don't really agree with anything that anyone is saying about this, no matter who they are. It's you can't. They're symbiotic, but that doesn't make them any less I don't know. There's nothing wrong with talking about identity in politics. It's just the way that it's sort of propped up.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. So, Maria, is it essentially that the behavior of Donald Trump is really becoming a problem of having others emulate it, and then secondly that whenever we try to have a conversation on identity, we haven't really figured out how to actually have that in a more unifying conversation, that no matter what, it's kind of a divisive rhetoric?
Wait, sorry, what was the first part of that?
The first part is, do you think the main damage Donald Trump has done for women is to give people a behavior to emulate?
I mean, first off, he's setting the bar extremely low for literally everyone. It's the opposite of pole vaulting. It's can you yeah, but I mean, the rhetoric, words matter. Your rhetoric matters. If you're being disgusting on national television all the time, then there's going to be millions of young people who are going to see that and think it's okay to act the same way. And that's just I don't know, if you take Psych 101 in college, then your professor will be you already know this because you've been alive for a while now. It's just that doesn't really feel I forgot what I was talking about.
Yeah. No, I mean, the idea was, do you think the biggest damage he does is really just the behavior?
Oh, basically sure, but he's just a great he's just an incredibly great symbol for everything that we need to strip away if we want our democracy to survive in a way that doesn't, like Stacey was saying, disenfranchise the people that these movements are purportedly trying to like save or whatever.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree that he's kind of symptomatic of a lot of the issues that are really presented in the American ethos of this pain, as well as this movement of identity politics. You have this one group really fighting back on that. So I'd be curious, Jess, how would you rate Donald Trump, first of all? And then would you kind of agree with a similar sentiment that really it's his behavior that's been the most detrimental part rather than like the policy of his administration?
Policy was bad too. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Bad.
So I tend to be someone that looks for the silver lining. And so what I continue to say about Donald Trump, and in grade school we always go, oh no, I guess all classes we get different grades for different things. So on the first level, I would give Donald Trump an A+, because he shined a big fat light on how messed up our country really is. And he literally says stuff, and then the crowd goes, yeah. And then the rest of us get to go, oh, that's who you are. And so he's really bringing to light just how nasty and yucky and just he's really been a great person to just show. I mean, he made me at least feel like I'm not alone, because I've been treated bad in the ways that he's treated women. I was like, oh, okay, so I see where they get it. It's just been around for a long time. And so I give him an A+ for being his most asshole self, if we can, swear on your show here. And he really has allowed the worst of the worst people to stand up and go, yeah, I agree with that guy. And when everything is said and done, we're all going to know who those people were, where maybe they have been hiding in the shadows for decades. So it's hard, pain is, there's a lot of people suffering because of his policies and things like that. And so, he gets an F in a lot of other categories, but the one thing he has done is shown us who people really are. And going forward, we're really going to quote unquote drain the swamp.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you there. I think it really was an awakening having Donald Trump win. I think as much as a lot of people can disagree with it, he really did shake up the status quo. Although his policy making is a lot of what the status quo is, it really kind of took the veneer off of it and showed all that festering dirt underneath that is just tolerated. So I certainly agree with you there, and I think that's a large part of why you have these like almost bust movements, where whether it was like Bernie or bust, you now have like that Twitter drama of like the Yang or bust account. So I think there's a large reason people are like, you know what, we're gonna bust with it, because at least right now people are activated and are engaged to try and fix these issues, even if we have this big corrupting force against it. Jess, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I do. One thing he also showed me is how much power a president has. Look at how many executive orders that he's signed into place, which gives me hope, because if Andrew Yang, when he gets elected and he wants to do some big, bold idea, Donald Trump has showed us it doesn't really matter what the rest of Congress is thinking. You only just need a few people to support your idea in a pen, So he's really shown kind of how weak our systems are and how powerful, or how much change the president really can make if he wants to be big and bold. So
yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think sometimes we do kind of have to fight that fire with fire. So at least we're kind of like back to a level playing field before we try and fix the system, so that just doesn't keep rehappening back and forth. So yeah, I totally agree with you there that him showing the flaws in the system was actually kind of helpful. Stacey, how would you kind of grade Donald Trump? I'm sure it's kind of somewhere in between an A+ and a Z. It's probably got to be. So where do you fall?
I use an international grading scale from 1 to 10. So I'm going to go with -1,000.
Okay.
But I would I do want to touch on something Jess said about specifically about the amount of power he's able to wield as the president. Mm-hmm. Everybody warned during the Bush years, and then even during the Obama years, that the arrogation of power to the executive in the form of the unitary executive that has continued to aggregate and aggregate and aggregate and aggregate. Everybody said, just wait until you get somebody who's a really problematic person who's going to have the ability to put into effect, to use these structures that Bush set up and Obama didn't exactly tear down. And here we go. So you know. I mean, yeah, I'd be excited to see somebody like Andrew Yang be able to wield those powers. However, I would not like to. Not like to know what would happen if somebody like Donald Trump, who was a little smarter, got a hold of them. So, but anyway, as far as my opinion on Trump, I don't really. I've been saying for a long time that I actually wasn't surprised when he got elected, because American culture has become so celebrity focused, so lacking in substance, and so just generally dumb for the past couple of decades. And I think that's a symptom of a few things. It's the spread of relatively inane mass media. It's the end result of a 4-decade attack on public education. There are a lot of things involved that made it possible for us to basically elect a professional wrestler. And then, but in reality, the real thing that I think propelled him to power was that he's a symptom of the probably kind of paralyzing anxiety that especially older white men have felt in the U.S. as they see the demographics change, as they saw feminism become like hip for 10 years, as they started to see people making strides. That's, I understand that was alarming, and that a lot of people might have held up their nose about the person, but been like, you know what, this guy is expressing my anxieties, so I'm going to vote for him. And I'm not just blaming men either, because, 53% of white women voted for him, so there's a racism issue there. But I just generally think that we have been for quite some time in a situation in this country and globally where capitalism is eating itself, where nobody can, because of the fact that nobody can really get a grip on something as complex as the geopolitical and geoeconomic system. They just want an easy narrative, and he provided it. And so, yeah, I mean, like Jess said, I do agree that it's a good thing that he's made it clear just what a sorry state things are in. And I'm glad that Andrew is able to say, yeah, things are in that sorry state, but here's a better solution than just let's ramp up the racism and sexism. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. We're lucky in one sense in that he's relatively ineffective because all he thinks about is himself. I mean, I know he's done a lot of damage, but just think about what somebody who was politically savvy could have done with his power. That's what concerns me. I actually think that sure, Andrew should use whatever power he can if he gets elected to get his policies enacted, and then immediately move as quick as he can to undo the unitary executive.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think we have to kind of use all of our tools in our tool belt to get back to a point where we can actually make real change. And I think you're absolutely right that the American people are really trying to buy into a narrative that is a little bit simpler. And I think as much as we can all rightfully agree that he has a lot of detail to his plan, I think Andrew Yang's messaging actually does a great job of keeping things very simple, that we're really giving back your rightful citizen shareholder stake to you so that you have the empowerment, not government or corporations. So I agree that's a really important thing. Stacey, I want to stay with you for one more question on this. You had said that part of this was kind of reacting to like kind of the hipness of the feminist movement for the past decade. And so I wanted to ask you all first, do you identify as a feminist? And then secondly, do you believe a man can be the most pro-woman candidate?
Who do you want to say this first?
Yeah, Stacey, if you wanted to go first.
Obviously, I refer to myself as a feminist. I actually refer to myself. I have a qualifier. I call myself an asshole feminist because I'm pretty aggro about it. I don't identify with any of the I don't identify completely with any of the waves. I have my own brand of feminism. I'm kind of a Catherine McKinnon type, in the sense that I think she uses the phrase feminism unmodified, which means there's one kind of feminism. If you're calling yourself this kind of feminist or that kind of feminist, you're missing the point. Feminism is about the fact that women are human beings, and that's kind of the sum total of it. So anything that doesn't start from that starting point is not to me beginning in the right foundation. But yes, I call myself a feminist. What was the second part?
The second part was, do you believe that a man can be the most pro-woman candidate?
Obviously, because I'm because I mean that's basically what my Twitter bio says. I truly believe that policy-wise, Andrew Yang has the most pro-woman set of policies, simply because there's a checklist in the DNC. Support for reproductive justice, support for equal pay. That stuff's common among all candidates. But what none of the rest of them are doing is altering the way we conceive of value in society, which is one of the biggest gripes, of Marxist feminists for the past 40, 50, 60, 70 years, is that what we consider valuable is way off of what.
I think you cut out there a little bit, Stacy. So I just while your audio is coming back, I wanted to go to Jess on this one. Jess, do you identify as a feminist? And then do you also believe that a man could be the most pro-woman candidate?
So again, I grew up Republican, and in a Republican household, a feminist is a crazy woman. And so I always had a negative connotation. So I actually had to learn what feminist meant. And there were kind of two definitions. The first one was, someone that believes there should be equal socially, financially, economically, politically, all these things for women. I'm definitely in that category. I think that all humans should have that equal right. And then there's the other type of definition of feminist, which is someone that actually organizes on behalf of women. This is probably the first ever woman thing that I've done that we're doing here. And so I don't necessarily organize for women. And in terms of, do I think that a man can be a pro-woman candidate or a best pro-woman candidate? I really would hope that any gender could be the most pro-human candidate. And so that pro-human candidate is naturally going to incorporate both man and woman. So I'm probably partially feminist. I believe in equality for all. And so that's it. Check.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I think that goes kind of to what Stacy was alluding to beforehand. It's really what that definition of feminism is, and it really is that element of humanism. It's really promoting that all people are being treated equally, and that this is coming from the lens of showing it through women what issues they're not being treated equally on. So I'd be curious, Maria, do you identify as a feminist, and do you believe that a man could be the most pro-woman candidate?
Yeah. Yes, I identify as a feminist. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. I went to a K through 8 school that had goats. Like, we had a goat. And then I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, where they, like, I don't know. I've always been, like, that stuff has, like, always been my norm, and I've always, like, sought information about those things. Like, I mean, like, hearing you guys talk is really, because I literally, like, I mean, like, my experience with the U.S. government is, like, I was, like, pooping my diapers while Bush was in office, and then, like, Obama was there, and then it was, like, okay, Trump is our president now, I guess. And now I'm, like, I can vote. I don't know. So, like, obviously I don't really have I don't know, the before that you guys talk about with Trump is very different from the before that the space of time that I have that I consider, like, I guess, like, pre-Trump or, like, whatever, just because, like, this is, I don't know, it, like, as someone who, like, my dad has this home video of me, like, dancing in my diaper in front of the, this is so morbid, like, dancing in my diaper in front of the TV while the towers were falling live on 9/11. And then you can just hear him saying, I don't think she understands the gravity of the situation. So, like, I don't know, like, I feel like I've sort of like grown up within, well, I mean, not feel like I have grown up in this, like, exclusively 9/11 world. Like, I don't really, and, like, I never really understood, like, how deeply it impacted the American psyche until, like, right now when people have started talking about, like, 9/11 and Watergate and all that stuff. I think you asked me if I called myself a feminist. The answer is yes, basically I grew up liberal and I'm still liberal. I need to keep like remembering what the questions are. Do I think a man can be the most pro-woman candidate? Yes, I think that's kind of like asking like, can you have a black friend? Like, yeah, like so long as like I don't care. Like I don't care so long as you're doing a good job. Like I literally don't like whatever, you know.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I totally agree
you
with that.
actually want to say something about that.
Yeah.
My mic got cut off and I had to re-sign in. I do think that, like, okay, so there is that checklist of pro-woman policies that you expect any DNC candidate to have. But, and of course, Andrew has all of those, but at the same time, again, UBI and human-centered capitalism do two things that nobody else is doing. One is, trying to shift our value system, away from the market, like I said, but it's also, again, that issue of the most vulnerable women in society would be receiving aid from Andrew Yang in a way that no other candidate is offering.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, speaking as someone who's like in that situation, basically what I want to say is yes, like that really does resonate with me and like with my peers who also support him, especially like the women like in my like social circles who like support him. A lot of it is about like this idea. I mean, like I feel like a lot of the time people don't really frame it in terms of consent a lot, but like it is really about consent and like not only the right to say yes to an opportunity when it comes up, but also the right to say no and like have like like you have a ground to stand on, knowing that like your government trusts you to know what's right for yourself. Like it gives you agency in like ways that none of the other candidates really come close to.
Yeah, no, I can certainly understand that. Enabling choice is a really powerful thing for any group that doesn't have currently power, because choice really is the power to make some type of action for yourself. I kind of find it interesting that this group went across the board identifying as a feminist. The previous group that I had of Marianne Williamson supporters across the board said that they weren't feminists. But both of you kind of said similar messages.
That surprises me too.
I know. Both of you said very similar messages, though, that it really is about focusing on the humanism and focusing that everyone is having their opportunity taken care of. I'd be curious, do you think that there is a need for shifting of branding to focus on equality for all people, or do you think that each of these individual identity focuses, whether it be like feminists or Black Lives Matter, do you think that it's better to be doing these separately, but with alliance? I'll begin, Maria. What do you think on that one?
Hard pass on the whole compartmentalizing them thing, because like, I mean, like that's sort of like, I mean, like you can't be one thing at once, and it's like we also need to start recognizing people as like, I think like a lot of this comes from like we see people as their parts and not like more than the sum of, because we don't, like we aren't encouraged to look at people that way, Fuck, what was the question?
So the question is really, do you think that it is a branding thing, that we don't have this unity in terms of how we kind of identify these movements, like having more maybe a unity of humanism versus having it specifically for women, specifically for racial communities?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I think there is a need for specific spaces for specific groups, and like because like epistemological, like epistemology and stories are just everything when it comes to these matters, and like a lot of the time like people are locked out from their communities when they are disenfranchised, so I think that is important. However, I do appreciate that I think with especially like the whole like humanity first thing, I think that like if you're not careful, it can easily be, like sort of like framed as an all lives matter type thing, and I don't think he's doing that so far, and I think that that's good, and also like keep on, like I don't know, because like I feel like for all the talk about identity politics, I just feel like I never really like, I don't know, I have an interesting relationship with it, but I don't ever really get to say anything about it, because like like for me, all my politics are identity politics because someone's going to look at me and be like, oh, you're a woman. Oh, you're a like blah, blah. Oh, you're Filipino. Oh, like it's really all about just sort of like understanding like, yes, but also like I'm like other people in those ways, but also no one else is like me. And I think that's sort of like where he's coming from. Yeah. I really forgot what the question was again.
I think that answered it actually pretty well. I think it really is first touching on all of these kind of individual aspects for the specific groups, kind of giving that storytelling behind it so that you can see how bigotry or bias can impact a specific person. It really adds that human element beyond just like a statistic or a broad stroke. It really lets you see that firsthand. And I also can kind of understand the concern of almost like all lives mattering it by saying it's just humanity first. We're taking care of all of you. We're not taking care of your specific needs.
We're doing it.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like, like.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. So I'd be curious, Jess, do you have a similar perspective about how do we actually unify these different identity movements? Is it really just making sure we focus on the humanism, or is there value in having these different groups like feminism as well as Black Lives Matter, etc.?
Well, again, as I said in the beginning, I'm kind of following the yoga path, which is really all about unity and humanity and really waking up to our humanity. But I think, as you said too, I don't understand, what Black Americans go through. I barely really understood what poor people went through until, the last decade of my life. So I think it's good that groups can stand up, but I also think it's great within those groups if they can also start to understand that we all have our own issues. And as we start to see, and the big challenge, I think, in America right now, and Stacey talked about it earlier, was there's a lot of white people that were never disenfranchised for most of their life, and now all of a sudden they're starting to feel that way, and they don't have a group. They have Trump, and so they've never really had a group. So I think if we can all just, acknowledge our humanity, that's awesome. And then within acknowledging our own humanity, if Black Lives Matters feels like they need to get together and do that, great. And if feminists need to feel like they need to do that, then that's great, as long as we're all, just being aware of our own humanity. So.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if you have a specific need that you want to call out, you have all that power to call that out for your own needs. But I think you're right that when we're trying to build this coalition, we can't prop up groups that are like exclusionary. We all have our perspective voice on the matter, and that we need to give people more ways to join a larger in-group so that we can be united. Stacey, obviously you were very strong in favor of identifying as a feminist. Do you think that it is potentially divisive to not have this more collectively, or do you think there's more value in having them each have their own specific voice?
Okay, so this is my take on identity politics. I think what a lot of people don't seem to grasp is that the history of identity politics, at least in the U.S., is heavily, heavily, heavily tied to the state. So, for example, with the passage of the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, I don't know how many people know this, but most of the groupings that we see, the identity politics groupings that we see in the U.S., actually come off of a form that a couple of bureaucrats at the EEOC wrote in the 60s because they couldn't figure out how to prosecute all the discrimination cases they were getting. So it seems pretty strange to me that culturally people would adopt a categorization off of a government form from the 60s and take that up as their quote unquote culture. So I find that odd in a sense. I do understand why people feel the need to get together with people, in similar circumstances and fight for what they think their communities need. However, there is so much variation within identity politics groupings that I feel like take the average, I don't know, because of people are categorized into like 5 or 6 different groups. If you take the average person out of each one, they have just as much in common with the average person out of the next one as they do with anybody inside the one that their efforts are focused on. Yeah, I mean there are oppression issues that certain groups face that other groups don't face. But what I'm saying is that are we basing our identities, are we basing our sense of culture on oppression? That seems a little silly. So, I mean, yes, of course I call myself a feminist because I do believe that women are oppressed in a lot of ways, both here and worldwide. But I totally also at the same time think that what we need to do is get together extra governmentally. Like we don't need to be getting together as a group and saying, "Hey, government, give us this token piece of policy." What we need to do is be getting all these groups together and saying, "How can we help each other achieve our goals?"
Yeah.
So um, there's overlap. For example, with Maria, she's got overlap between Asian Pacific, a quote unquote Asian Pacific identity or a mixed race identity, and being a woman, and blah 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 blah. There's all different kinds of these things. So there's people. I'm from this class, but this racial background, and there's so much more overlap than people even are willing to recognize. And it just seems to me that there has to be a way for everybody to sit down and say, yeah, okay, this isn't a zero-sum game. Yes, the people that I identify with the most need this thing. This group of people needs that thing. Why don't we get together and get all of it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of...
No, I understand what you're saying. I think you're really trying to get at, we're almost limiting ourselves by labeling ourselves. I think we can all say that there are these collective needs that we all need to fight for, but that if we are just saying, this is what it means to be Asian, we're really doing ourselves a disjustice, because even within that group, there is such diversity. So I totally agree with you that we do ourselves a disservice to just put ourselves in buckets. Humanity is really, we have like 7 billion buckets because we all have our own uniqueness to us.
And one big bucket, our humanity.
Exactly.
I probably should say that my conception of feminism, like I said, the starting point is that women are human beings, but in addition, it extends to all different other types of situations. Like to me, feminism encompasses treating everyone like a human being, and yes, I have to prioritize in my thinking. Okay, who are the people who are the most in need right now? And oftentimes you find that those are people who labels like poor, woman, person of color, all of those apply to. So to me, it's start off with the highest priority, the people suffering the most, and then move on from there until you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, so I understand that. And I think one of the things you really got at too was it takes like a movement culture to say, we are hearing from all of these voices and we're bringing them in. And so one of the things I wanted to kind of hear from you all is, how do you think Andrew Yang has done in this approach? How do you think in his course of running a campaign, he's done a job to actually amplify women's voices or women's concerns? Jess, do you have any thoughts on what you think specifically he's done well as maybe what he hasn't done so well yet?
I guess for me, I've been fortunate to not be in the category of an abusive relationship or professional or anything like that. So for him just to say the word, there's millions of women that are in abusive situations and the freedom dividend would allow them, like in that Stacey was talking about, that to me, since I didn't come from there, that was a big aha, like, oh my gosh, of course. So I'm really glad that he says that. I don't like that that's the only thing he says. He talks a lot about how the freedom dividend is going to empower entrepreneurship. I saw some math recently that said 40% of new entrepreneurs are women, which means that, if you give women healthcare and a freedom dividend, we have, the potential to be one of the biggest small job creators, in the country. And so he never really talks about women in a positive aspect as far as other things that we could be doing, like we'll be more entrepreneurial or, in our particular category. So it would be nice if he reminded women that the freedom dividend would help them, not just for being mothers or just for being abused, but also, professionally, that really could empower us to go out and build our dreams.
No, I think that's really interesting. He's focusing a lot on almost the vulnerabilities of women right now and helping them out of those vulnerabilities rather than saying, this is more than that, this is also empowering. You can do more rather than just doing less suffering. So I think that's a really interesting point. Maria, how do you feel about Andrew's job in the course of his campaign, trying to empower women's voices and women's needs?
I think that the campaign did the best they could for stage 1, and I think they're going to do better in stage 2. I think that I obviously hold them to a higher standard than I hold the other campaigns. So I don't know, if he were any other candidate, I'd probably just go straight to being like, oh yeah, great job, but like, obviously, like, fuck, I forgot what I was talking about.
No, I hear you. It's like we do keep our own candidates to a higher standard, so when they're messing up, we're like, oh no,
Yeah.
how could you do this? This is kind of reflective of me. Is there something that you think that he could improve from that phase 1 of the campaign into this phase 2?
Yeah, I think something that's really important is to talk about not only like how that people are in these situations, but how they get there. And the answer is obviously that, like, I mean, he talks a lot about incentives, and I think that's great, and like corporate incentives, absolutely, but also individual incentives, and again, how the mindset of scarcity sort of like, reinforces all these rifts and all these violence, like all this violence, like for example, like, and again, like how identity plays into that, for example, like the assault that I talked about earlier, like wouldn't like happened like in part because I was with another woman, like if I had been with a dude, they obviously would have been like, oh, a dick, respect, peace, it's just like, again, it's all like people talk about like because like, I mean, Bernie supporters talk about a lot about like like, I don't know, there's revolution and there's reform, then there's revolution, and then there's evolution and paradigm shift. I forgot what the fucking question was again, but basically, like, I feel like Andrew was the only one, like, substantially sort of, like, talking about that, and I think, okay, I remember what I was saying now. I think that he needs to go for that more, and yes, talking about how his policies differentiate from everyone else's, but also how, like, I mean, like, like, again, with the identity politics thing, like, these, like, I don't know, when, like, so, I don't know, some people just have, like, more footing than others, and it's just a matter of, like, yeah, I don't know, I think he needs to talk more about, how he's the only candidate who's separating, human value from human labor. Like, he's the only candidate who's doing that, therefore, like, like, I think there's a lot to be said about that, and there's a lot to be said about, like, his, like, the optimism he has in, like, normal people that ordinary politicians don't have that might, prompt them to laugh at him on stage or something, because, because they haven't had to think these things through.
Yeah. No, I understand kind of what you're saying. This is really first like a messaging thing that you have to go to more the root causes of issues first of all, so that we can see why these situations are occurring and prevent them, because we know it's a lot easier and cheaper in prevention than afterwards. And then I think the other kind of just like interesting note to what I'm hearing here is it's just we have to empower people. We have to show that there is both that optimism side, not just that people are suffering, but that this is going to make people who are doing just okay do good. So I think that's really important. And with that, I wanted to just kind of go to Stacey. How do you think like the state of the campaign is doing in really bolstering women's voices as well as women's issues?
Okay, so one of the things that drew me to the campaign in the first place was that I don't know whether Andrew Yang has read these people or whether he's thought about these things in the same way, but I saw his platform as reflecting some of the ideas that I've seen from, people like Sylvia Federici talking about decoupling gender and as Maria said, decoupling human value from market, like decoupling gender from value, decoupling gendered labor from the market, undercutting the idea that yeah, again, like I'm repeating myself, that the market determines our value as human beings. So I see the freedom dividend as something close to the wages for housework movement that came out of some fairly radical feminists in the 70s. And I just saw a lot of potential there. Just even a start, $1,000 a month is enough to already start moving that that social system of value away from the market and towards, where real value is created, such as reproductive labor and, the teaching of social and cultural and community values. So I do think that I don't even know if he realizes just how radical his ideas are for this, for with regard to women. However, I think that I'm going to go hard in the paint right now for a second. There's a few things that I would like to see happen. One of them is I would like to see more women in leadership positions in the campaign, because right now the staff map is looking real male. No offense. I know that they just hired 2 women, but that makes it 90% male? Sorry, that's not good enough. Another thing, in the same way that he denounced racism amongst his base when he had a bunch of alt-right, guys that came out of Joe Rogan, he needs to do the same thing with misogyny, because a lot of male yang gang are behaving like total pigs and making it extremely difficult for us to recruit more women to the movement.
We can go through my DMs.
And the only chance of that getting fixed, the only chance of the optics on the internet for curious women voters to change is if Andrew himself tells these people, knock that shit off, because it looks bad. It makes the work women for Yang are trying to do really difficult. And it's kind of like, we spend all this time to build up this infrastructure only to have male Yang gang come around and piss all over it. And it's driving me insane. I think that's probably all I'll say on that, because I've already, been critical enough.
Yeah, no, I hear you. First of all, I agree that we do need some level of representation within the campaign, and that it would be good for the leader to call it out. I think it's important that we kind of learn from some of the mistakes that were made during the 2016 campaign for Bernie Sanders. He had a lot of these types of issues kind of boil up for him, whether it be like the Bernie bro narrative or the narrative that came out like post-campaign about the sexual harassment that he had within the Nevada branch. I think we have to start having that representation from women so that these gatekeepers, when these concerns of sexism are occurring, they can actually reach that point so that Andrew knows that it's a problem and that he can make statements like you kind of asked of him. So go ahead, Stacey.
Like we are already at the point right now that happened in 2016, and it is essential that it get resolved immediately before he rises any further in the polls, because this will become a problem. It's not it could become a problem, it will become a problem. It is a problem, but I'm saying it's going to become a massive recruitment problem very quickly.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. When you kind of reach this point in the campaign, the microscope has finally reached us, because people are like, oh, he's still around in the November debate. We can't just ignore him anymore. Okay, let's start looking for negative things to say about him.
Let's start digging,
Yeah, so I certainly agree with you that it should be trying to cut it off at this point. With that being said, I kind of want to go into the next topic of we have almost another new member in addition to the staff coming on board. We've heard that Evelyn is likely to be joining the campaign soon as well, Andrew Yang's wife. And so we have, as we all know, a history of only male candidates being president at the end of the day. And so that's led to a lot of first ladies over the year. I wanted to know what you guys thought, first of all, about what Melania has done in her situation beside Trump. And then secondly, what you would hope maybe Evelyn could do on the campaign trail, or as well if Andrew does win. So what do you think, Jess, on that one? How first has Melania been doing next to Trump, as well as what you think Evelyn should be doing on the campaign trail, and hopefully if we win this election?
I would say my only comment on Melania is that she's doing, I suppose, the job of a wife, which is just to shut up and support her husband. And maybe that's my old Republican father talking out of me. And I really don't pay too much attention to her. I think for Evelyn, she has the situation that's unique from a presidential family where she has a child with autism, and it sounds like that's a huge deal in our country, or sounds like it is a huge deal in our country. And I think if that she can take her platform and be a voice for something that's very close and dear to her heart, I think that's just going to be amazing for that community of people that are just learn different or have different ways that their mind works. So.
No, I think that's a really good idea. I think sometimes it does require that personal experience to be able to talk to something. And so having that situation of being a parent to autism really gives her the opportunity to be a voice to lead on that. I know that's a serious issue here in New Jersey. It's something like 1 in every 34 people have autism. So it's something that, I think Andrew's done a great job in helping like destigmatize, talking about all the capability that his kids actually still have, even though that they have autism. So I really would hope that maybe Evelyn can take that another step further. So that's a very good potential idea. Maria, do you have similar ideas for how Evelyn could contribute to the campaign or beyond if we do win? And do you have any thoughts on how Melania has done while in office with Trump so far?
Like poorly? I don't know. I don't know. She's just another white woman who chose her whiteness over her womanhood, and it's I don't know, it truly be like that sometimes. I mean, when I don't know, Melania is to be fair, I don't know shit about the vast majority of first ladies in U.S. history, but I do I do troll r/Epstein from time to time, and it is probably bad for my blood pressure. But Melania was literally, obviously this isn't secret or anything, but the more I read about that stuff specifically, the more I realize the extent to which Melania was literally just imported from Europe to be arm candy, and obviously that's no secret. But reading also the testimonies of the other women, it's really interesting for me to think about where did Melania's incentives differ from theirs. Because Melania was one of his models, and the Trump, the modeling agency she was signed to is obviously at this point people know that there was a lot of sex trafficking going on, et cetera, et cetera. So Melania really fascinates me, but in a way that I feel but I also feel she fascinates me in a way that is obviously designed to waste my time. I don't need to be thinking about her, so I really don't.
No, I think that's certainly understandable, and I think even the few initiatives that she's said she wanted to kind of lead on, there's really been nothing on that. Her Be Best campaign, where she was trying to help fix online bullying. Just take your husband's phone away. That's a great first step.
Away your husband's phone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a great point, that she really is not doing anything of note that we should be really focusing on. And she, for the most part, has been trying to stay out of the limelight, because I think as much as some people here are kind of saying she might be it might be a controversial term, but gold digging, Trump had money, she was a model for him, she had probably different incentives, she didn't want to even move houses to stay with Trump, she stayed in New York. So yeah, there's a lot there. But Maria, I wanted to go back to you and hear your thoughts about what Evelyn should also be doing for the campaign.
I mean, also really quick, just going to throw this out there. If the economic incentives that Andrew Yang is proposing had been in place, when they had, when Epstein had been doing all this bullshit, they would have had less 16-year-old girls who were working minimum wage at Mar-a-Lago, obviously, because they would have had money, but I digress. Feminism.
Evelyn.
Yes, thank you. You know me. Evelyn, so, I mean, again, my only real first lady that I've, looked up to in my life was Michelle Obama, and, neoliberal shill, but, great personality, great arms. I think, again, people, you were saying, Jess, I think there's something really phenomenal, I think, about the idea of having, an Asian first family with, a neurodivergent with like an openly or visibly neurodivergent kid. I think that because that's something that like, I mean, like, obviously I have the memory of like a dead goldfish. Like my youngest brother is the same way. Like, you know, it's just, and like our middle brother is like the most tranquil person around and just like tells us all to shut up. And then we're like, yeah, you're right. So, you know, it's like the more like, and like my parents both work in like like psychiatric stuff and like psychiatry, psychology, like fucking whatever. So like, of course, like the first thing they're gonna do is like think about their med school experience and like look for 10 books on the subject or whatever. But like, obviously, like the vast majority of people don't have those resources, and when you don't have those resources, then you are like, when you don't have the right resources, you're bombarded by all this bullshit, like, you know, obviously, like all this red tape that you have to go through with the public school system, like, and it's, I don't know. I think that Evelyn, I'm gonna be honest, I honestly don't really understand the role of a first lady within the context of the presidency, because like I've only been alive so long, like, you know, so I haven't really had a lot of models in real time. But I think that I think also it's important that like, so I think it's good that like, it's great that Yang talks about her so much on the campaign trail and acknowledges all the heavy lifting that she's doing, and acknowledges all the sacrifices that she is making, and like talks about them like as a, like their relationship as like, you know, like symbiotic and like all this, like, I don't know. I think that, I don't know, having a healthy married couple in the Oval Office would be super dope.
No, yeah, I can understand that. I think we have missed that model since Trump has come into office. And I can also understand your lack of clarity on the role of a first lady, because it has varied so much. It's not like an official position. It's really something that is case by case basis of how they want to use that platform. Really, it's just a elevated status, usually being next to the president. Your words suddenly gain more voice too. And I think it was also a really important note that you brought up, that to actually help these people with neurodivergent development, it's important that we give families the resources to be able to get the needed treatments or get the necessary education on how to interact and handle their child. So I think that's a really important point too. So Stacey, I'd be curious, how do you feel A, Melania has been doing in the Trump administration, and then B, what are you hoping that Evelyn might be able to do while on the campaign trail, as well as hopefully if Andrew Yang is elected, what she could do as first lady?
So to me, Melania is kind of emblematic of this shadowy world of exploitation of women that Trump has obviously been involved in for, I don't know, his entire life. Him and his friends, I don't know, you know, Epstein, blah blah blah. But to me, I just think of Melania as a hostage. She attempted to, you know, every first lady seems to have a pet project. She made an attempt, but it's you know, she can't really address bullying with her husband being who he is. Yeah. And then she's just kind of MIA, and I honestly think that that's probably where she wants to be. She clearly hates him.
Yeah.
She you know, people say, you know, whatever they want to say about economic incentives. She comes from a poor country. This is not an equal relationship. This is an exploitative relationship, and she is, in my book, a hostage. So that's all I really want to say about Melania. I don't blame her for anything. I'm like, you know, people are always posting look at this picture of her naked. Can you believe this is the first lady? I'm like, dude, she's from Slovakia. She was poor. She had one thing going for her. She did what she had to do.
Shut up.
You know, she did what she had to do, and like, you know, shitting on her for that is completely unacceptable in my book. So I don't really touch Melania, other than to say that she's blameless in my book. As far as Evelyn, I'm interested. I mean, of course, I would like to see her come out on the campaign trail soon. people are floating this idea of her becoming a campaign employee, which I think is not a good idea, considering the fact that whenever that happens, it's scandalous. However, I do think she would be an awesome first lady. I think, of the first ladies I've seen in my lifetime, the projects that they work on have been of varying levels of ambition. We haven't had an Eleanor Roosevelt in a while, but I really think that she, with her executive experience and with her education, could be an extremely important advocate, like as Jess and Maria have said, for neurodivergent people, for destigmatizing neurodivergence, for ensuring that our school systems begin to start to reflect the reality that not everybody thinks and learns the same way, that there's still value, that everybody has different value to contribute, not lesser value to contribute. So I have we're speculating, I guess, on what she would do, but if she did something like that, that would be great. But I'm sure that whatever she chooses to do will be definitely worthwhile. And I don't see her choosing something silly or frivolous or anything of the above. Anything.
I have to agree with that assessment. I think she's a very capable woman, and so she could do multiple different issues that she wants to choose, whatever she's passionate about, but that I think it could be very valuable, given her particular experience, to be able to talk to some of the experiences that she has with her children. I want to say one thing about Melania. I think she's not completely blameless. There are certain actions we can quote, like the whole jacket incident when she was about to visit the detention camp. Like there are certain instances where she's not been of the highest quality of person, but I agree for the most part this is an unequal relationship, and I think it's actually kind of good on her end to try and not be in the limelight with him. I wouldn't want to be in the limelight with him. I don't know why the people in his administration do. So she's playing it kind of smart, trying to be just away from it all. I do still say it was really ironic that she picked bullying to be her main issue.
She had the window to do the right thing, and I think it's long past.
Yeah, exactly. And so now she's just like, oh, I tried. Like a lot of the administration says, I did my week, I tried, and now I'm away. Okay. But with that said, I want to turn to our last question before we get into the 3-on-3. I wanted to find out, when you guys are talking to fellow women about Andrew Yang, what are some of the policies that you first bring up, as well as what's one policy you'd like Andrew to actually add so that it would be even easier for you to sell it to other women? Jess, what do you think about that? What do you first talk about, and then what do you want Andrew to add so it's even easier for you to convince people?
Well, I pretty much stick with the freedom dividend. I talk to a lot of strangers and a lot of people online. If I can't get them past the freedom dividend, I just kind of move on. If they're in the conservative leaning, I really try to focus on just how they need to get out of that mindset that I grew up in, which is a person has no value if they're not working. And also, how much collective stress relief it would bring to their own kids, if they're moms, and to the local economy. If they're Democrats, I tend to focus on that difference I talked about Bernie in the beginning, which is, a lot of Democrats, for example, free childcare and a government job. It doesn't make any sense to me that they'll say to a new mom, we'll give you free childcare and we'll send you to a federal job so you can leave your kid with a stranger, versus giving you money and a choice. And so kind of depending on what type of woman it is. And then in terms of what other policy would I want him to talk about for women in general, he doesn't talk about it, nor does he demonstrate it in his own life, but I wish he would wake up to the fact that there's a lot of lifestyle choices that we could make to be healthier. He talks a lot about how mental health is a crisis in this country, and I can tell you from my own, quote unquote, mental health issues, getting rid of things that are normal in our society, and I guess not rid of. I don't want to force people to do anything, but let's just be truthful. Things like a lot of caffeine and a lot of sugar, and we have soda machines in high schools, and the junk food that we feed our kids in grade schools, and they have parties and Halloween parties, and they feed the kids full of sugar, and then they wonder why they have behavioral issues. Like food and lifestyle, and again, I'm on the yoga path, so I know meditation has been a huge thing for my mental health issues. These very simple lifestyle changes that we could make to be more healthy humans that literally cost nothing to our healthcare system, He doesn't really talk about solutions yet, except for bringing down drug costs, and we need to fix the problem, which is great. But like I said, I don't know if he really understands. But he does talk about his medical care is going to cover holistic care. So maybe if there was one thing I would like him to say louder, it is that when he does talk about his medical program, he also wants to have it cover holistic care, which I think is really important. So
that went over super well at the art forum, so I don't think you're wrong when he did mention that.
Yeah, no,
awesome.
I have to agree, and I think it would be just a good thing for Andrew overall to talk more about what education should become in our country. He's kind of talked about some of the problems within it, like standardized testing or not providing enough resources for it. But I think the actual material that we're covering, whether it be like healthier lifestyles or some of the skills that people need, is something that he could certainly use to talk about more. So, Maria, what do you think on this? What do you usually talk to fellow women about when you're trying to talk about Andrew Yang? And what's something that you'd like Andrew to potentially embrace that he doesn't currently that would make it even easier for you to talk to women about him?
Like Joe said, the freedom dividend is a big one. I talk a lot about, I have a lot of friends who have, done sex work because that's, obviously, there's only so many jobs you can do when you're also, a student and you're, in your 20s and stuff, and, I know that, when I, got sick, the only profitable thing I really had left, was my body, so, that was sort of what I did, and it's, it's empowering if it's a choice, but if it's not, then it's just fuck that, so I think that, and I think that a lot of people, when you frame UBI as a consent thing, I've been talking about, I think it does get a lot easier for people to sort of understand from a feminist lens or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I'm my social circles are it's a lot of artists, it's a lot of writers, people who are politically plugged in. So I don't know. I honestly another thing that I do end up plugging more than I thought I would was is the journalism fellowship thing and also local journalism funds and the way that he wants to because I think it's very emblematic of how he wants to restructure the way that people give and receive different communications and the incentives for those communications and what they mean or whatever. Yeah, I think I would love if he added something and I don't know, this is obviously a bigger thing, but I think I wish that a presidential candidate would specifically address this weird pain epidemic among women that isn't really known about until you start talking about it with the right people, and then it's very, very evident. And I don't know, and just sort of I think also I wish that more of the candidates frame sexual violence as a public health issue as opposed to I don't know.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's framed as a criminal issue. So I actually wanted to ask a little bit of clarification on what you were saying there. You were kind of alluding to this almost hidden pain. Do you mind describing a little bit more what you kind of meant by that?
Yeah. I mean this is obviously very personal for me because I so I have chronic pain and it started after I got raped. So it's for me it's very, very literal. And for a lot of people it's it's another one of those things where I think it's just a part of the Me Too movement that totally got left behind, I mean if you're thinking about it within that it's something that falls under that umbrella that has yet to be addressed. And I think that I don't know.
No, I hear you.
Ties into also doctors not believing women and sort of talking again re-incentivizing these things so that human wellness is the end goal rather than corporate profit because yeah.
No, I hear you. I think a lot of what you're really getting at is there's a psychological trauma that hasn't actually been given a chance to be talked out and treated like a health problem. When it came to this Me Too movement, a lot of the focus was on getting rid of the bad men rather than taking the women who had gone through this trauma and trying to help them have the resources to recover. So
Yeah,
I
and
think
also,
that's
like,
important.
asking why, what makes this, like, what props this behavior up, what makes this behavior possible, and who profits from it.
Yeah, no, I certainly understand that. So, Stacy, do you have a similar thing in terms of how you usually talk about Andrew Yang when you're talking to other women, focusing a lot on the freedom dividend? And then, secondly, what are some policies that you'd hope Andrew could embrace to make it even easier for you to talk to women about him being the best women candidate?
So I'm with everybody else. I mean, when I approach people, I go, I say, he ticks off all the same boxes with regards to women's issues that everybody else in the field does. So his quote about men leaving the room when it comes to reproductive justice questions really is a good seller for me. I mean, I know it's not possible when policies being enacted. However, it was a really good quote. The freedom dividend, I also couch in the same terms. I'm like, I tell people this is a springboard out of exploitation of all kinds for people. And it actually, that word consent, when you're talking about, the word consent is meaningless when somebody's poor, because poverty is coercion and that's not consent. So I use that a lot because, a lot of my friends are feminists and the word consent comes up a lot, So I definitely hit those points. I would also like to see him address sexual violence is a public health crisis. I have a friend who works for the CDC, and she said that they are looking at, I don't want to get too gross here, but they're looking at the effects of the pornography industry on teenagers as a public health crisis, because they're seeing 14, 15, 16-year-old girls coming into emergency rooms with the kinds of injuries that should not be occurring in should not be occurring in young girls, and then they're getting them from the point. This is all occurring due to the influence of a generation of boys raised by violent pornography.
The guys,
and, it's not. I mean, he tweeted about controlling the rampant access to internet pornography, but what?
He should have, that had potential to be so good. Like, that tweet.
I wish I could have written it for him.
So bad.
But I mean, for the first time, somebody that's not a religious right character is actually saying, yeah, this is a problem.
And like,
there's an entire generation of there's literally a generation of boys coming of age with erectile dysfunction because of the pornography industry, and girls with these permanently like life altering injuries because they're trying to recreate things that children have seen on the internet. So there's that. There's just the general sexual exploitation. People do not want to face just how widespread sexual exploitation is in this country. And I'm sorry, but it's far, 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 far more widespread than the stats that we all hear.
Oh, absolutely.
And people just don't want to believe it. They don't want to believe that domestic human trafficking occurs. They're wrong. They don't want to believe that sexual exploitation. That the number of women who have experienced sexual assault or sexual harassment is as high as it really is. They're, the 1 in 6 or 1 in 5 numbers shock people to death, and it's like, dude, it's more like 4 in 5. Like, so that kind of thing. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see someone address that, and if it has to be a dude, let it be a dude, because no one listens to us.
No, so
currently, we're changing that.
Yes, indeed. So I totally hear you on that, and I wanted to see. It seemed, Maria, you wanted to jump in on some of those points. Do you want to add anything on the point, especially of his comments around pornography?
Yeah, I actually I just haven't really I don't know. I just haven't had the time to create something that talks about why this is so important to me, because who has the time for fucking anything? But one of the things that one of those dudes said was because basically oh my god, I don't want to get into details, but it was basically lesbians, cool, and then that's an established fact, lesbians, and he's like, oh, I've totally jacked off to this before, I've jacked off to this so many times, and it's
yeah.
And it's this weird dilemma for me, because it's I do this work all the time, and I've done this work since I was 15, I think, and I've been reading about this stuff since I was a sad 11-year-old on Tumblr, you know, like I've always been pretty aware of like my identity and like how, you know, like how it impacts like the things I do and the things that are done, etc., etc. But like I think a lot of the time, I think that is one of the issues that like the left especially is still really weird about, because they think that like, I don't know.
No, but I kind of hear a general sentiment like across the board.
Yeah.
It's like uncomfortable truth telling. So I think with this in mind, I want to transition to our final segment, which is the 3-on-3. This
Wait, this is
topic.
messing up. Is it us?
No, I can hear everyone fine.
I'm gonna rejoin in 1 second. I'm getting cut off.
No problem. So I'll piece this together later, but essentially what I'm... Stacey, are you back?
Yeah, sorry. And I thought the Wi-Fi was bad in Panama, but apparently it's worse in Oregon.
No problem. So I'm going to piece this together. I'll probably do a little bit of studio magic, but I wanted to go to our final segment of the day. So it's what I do with every single panel that I bring on. It's called the 3-on-3. And so this week, as I've had a lot of women on, I wanted to keep the same topic so that I get a wide range of answers on this. So you're going to get 3 choices, and I want you to tell me what is your highest prioritization of the 3, or none of the above. Okay? So when you answer, just give me your answer first, and then I'll come back around again to get the reason why you chose that. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the first group, and I'll start with Jess on this once I read through them. So the first group is, would you rather have universal 24/7, 365 days a year childcare? Would you rather have free public transportation, or would you rather have free internet?
Jonathan, I think I'm going to have to pick number 3, incentivize states to provide free public internet.
Yeah, I understand that, especially with this internet problem we were just talking about. That would be great to have another alternative. Maria, which of those 3 would you take? The childcare, the transportation, or the internet?
Public transportation system, as long as it's actually effective.
Okay. And Stacey, where do you land on those 3?
Childcare, because it's more expensive than all the above.
Okay. And now we have 3 diversified opinions here. So, Jess, why did you choose internet of the 3?
Because I think it's an empowering tool. I think there's a lot of people that are in rural America, and if we have a freedom dividend and people don't have to leave places that they love, that anyone can learn anything if they take the time, and you can work in a lot of capacities if you have access to the internet. And if you're homeless and you're struggling, a lot of them I've met have phones, but they don't have service. So they're running around trying to find a place that'll let them use their Wi-Fi. And so I think it would just empower anyone to be able to get help anytime that they needed it, and would give them the right and power to be able to learn and educate themselves wherever they needed, as well as earn and communicate. Yeah.
No, I think that's super important. The actual empowerment of people to have access to information as well as communication. Certainly understandable. Maria, you went with public transportation. Why did you think that was more important than the internet or the childcare?
I mean, childcare, like, I am a child, so, like, whatever. Not applicable. I really, like, I honestly don't know, like, which I would, like, I don't know, I'm very back and forth on internet versus public transportation, but I think like, they both come down to the same thing, and that is, like, universal public access, and I think that's, like, whatever sets the precedent for, like, public good, public access, and, like, you know, less red tape and less barriers to the things that people need in order to, lead fulfilling lives, then, like, I'm down. I think that, like, public transportation specifically would really depend on, like, the mode, because obviously the planet is, like, on fire. So, and, like, but, like...
No, but I'm hearing the point that you're really getting across is both of those, the internet as well as public transportation, are kind of applicable to everyone across the board. You being the age that you are, you don't have a child necessarily, so the child care isn't as universal for you.
Friends want children, because boomers...
Hey, I don't have them either.
Yeah, it's expensive, first of all. Like, it's around $14,000 a year annually on average to raise a child. So I understand that, and childcare would go a long way to help with that. And so, Stacy, you had picked childcare. Was that part of the reason you before said it's the most expensive of the bunch? Was that why you picked it?
It is because of the fact, that I come in contact with so many struggling, I mean, really struggling, like coming into a crisis center, struggling single mothers who could probably figure out would have an easier time coming up with $50 a month for data on their phone, or paying for public transportation to and from work, obviously depending on the area. But finding the money, like for example, one of my best friends has a daughter who's autistic, and her childcare costs eat up a third of her income, which basically puts her and her partner in the poorhouse. And so, it's not. She works in order to pay for childcare for her daughter. It's crazy. And so, but a lot of the women who come into the center that I work at, that's one of their chief concerns. I'm trying to escape this guy, or I'm single to begin with, or I've been abandoned, or whatever, and I can't go get a job because none of the jobs that I can get will pay for the childcare that I need to attend that job. And it's just, it appears to me from the experiences, or from the experiences I've heard from other women, that childcare is such a financial burden and such a stumbling block to their ability to basically do anything other than childcare, that it just seems like it would make the most impact, not necessarily universally, but for the people who need it, it would make a much grander impact.
No, I can hear you there. I think what you're really getting at is it really provides the most freedom to people. I think that's certainly true, and it's a large reason why our previous group that were given these questions, they almost across the board universally chose childcare. And I think one of the important things that they had brought up during that episode that I think would be great to share here is really, it's not just for the parent side of things either. By giving universal childcare, we provide an environment in which our children are actually receiving the necessary stimuluses that they need to develop properly. They're having people who are actually looking after them rather than, potentially a babysitter who's not fully trained and you're just paying them a minimum wage. This would be accredited people who are actually raising your children and would be potentially able to pass along some curriculum. So maybe they're not like an infant, where it's just literally babysitting them and making sure that they're cleaned up and fed. At some point, you still need childcare for kids that are in elementary school or potentially middle school, and that time should be used productively teaching them things. So I tend to say that probably has the most impact for the people who need it, and I do have this concern of like balancing between universality, but I usually go with childcare myself as well. So now I want to go into the second batch of these questions. So here are your three choices, and this time I'll start with Maria on this one. So the three are: 1, decriminalize all drugs and legalize marijuana. 2, legalize prostitution. And 3, legalize gambling. So,
is bullying illegal?
Yes.
I wouldn't know. I've never gambled.
Some places.
I mean, I know it's controversial, but like, please God, legalize prostitution. Like, and also I think it's, like, yes, legalize prostitution, but also, like, we need to, like, not treat sex workers like garbage. Like, it's essentially, like, what I want to say. And, like, I think, like, sex workers' rights have yet to be folded into, mainstream labor movements, and, I think, I wasn't supposed to explain, right? I'll shut up.
That's okay. Yeah, so I certainly can understand with those points, and we'll get more of them afterwards. But Jess, how do you fall between those three? Would you rather decriminalize drugs and legalize marijuana, legalize prostitution, or legalize gambling, or none of the above?
Well, where's all of the above? You gave us none of the above. Where's the all of the above option? That's what I want for this one.
What we do here is we give people hard choices.
Ooh, okay. Then I'd probably have to say decriminalize all drugs.
Okay. And how about you, Stacy? Where do you fall between those three?
None of the above with qualifications.
Okay, so we'll definitely get some explanations there from all of the above to none of the above. So Maria, beforehand, before you had stopped yourself, you were going into some more reasons of why you thought legalizing prostitution and really helping remove the cultural stigma behind it was so important. Do you want to elaborate more on that?
I mean, the thing about legalizing prostitution is that poverty begets prostitution, and then within that sense, like, there's obviously going to be some sort of inherent power imbalance unless you're literally, like, empowering yourself to, like, I mean, like, some people love doing that, that's great, some people really don't and have to, that's also great. So I think a lot of it is, like, removing, like, just, like, identifying the abusive parts of the system that make all, like, so much harm so possible, and going from there. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I love drugs as much as the next person, but, like, I'm gonna go with that.
I think that makes sense, and I think one of the interesting things about legalizing prostitution is, first, it feels like it's a weird thing that the left hasn't fully, like, embraced, as we've gone with full, like, pro-choice in terms of women being able to use their body for the sake of abortion, as they rightfully should, but we don't want to necessarily give them the full right to use their body for sex if they'd like to as a career. As well, usually these people, as you said, that go into it sometimes due to the economic pressures, they don't get the reporting tools that they need in case there are abusive men who are taking advantage of them, because it's a shady job currently because it's not legal. But I'd be curious, Jess, you were really going with all of the above, and you had given a prioritization more so to, I guess, the decriminalizing of all drugs and legalizing marijuana. Why did you choose that one?
Well, first I chose all of the above because I probably lean libertarian, and that I really like the idea of saying we should be free to make our own choices. I do think that we should be taught how to have healthy connections within ourselves, so we're not having to choose these things. And I would hope that these would come under, there'd be a freedom dividend basic income in place, so a woman's only choosing prostitution if she wants to, not because she has to. But so back to drugs, I think it's just that, right now the drug machine just destroys lives. I mean, there are just people that, in the non-legalized states, that their lives are destroyed, and then people that have opioid issues or other issues where, again, that's just a mental health thing. They're really hurting inside. There's a reason why that they're choosing to cloud their mind with drugs. And so they should be getting help and not jail. And I really appreciate Andrew Yang leading in that direction and kind of following Portugal's lead in how that they're, addressing people that are, dealing with opioids and things like that in a way of helping people. So I think that, just freedom, and I think the drugs are just, the system just penalizes people and just destroys lives by criminalizing drugs, when those are really just a sign that people need something within themselves.
No, I think that's understandable, but before giving my take on that, Stacey, you kind of were on the opposite side of things, that you said no to all the above with a qualifier. So do you want to elaborate on what that qualifier is?
Yeah, so I'm closer to everybody on this than it probably sounded. Okay, so as far as drugs, I'm with Jess. However, obviously I think marijuana should be legalized nationwide. As far as other drugs, the only circumstances under which I think full drug decriminalization makes sense is if the funds are put in place to give people access to drug treatment. If that happens, I'm all for it. If it doesn't happen, God knows what will happen with that could be really chaotic. So I truly believe, I am a big fan of the Portugal model, but the Portugal model includes funding for treatment. So in that case, yes. Gambling, I'm just gonna say, I've lived in countries where gambling is legal for a long time. Nothing good comes of it. Nothing. There is literally no upside to legalizing gambling that I know of. Other than, I don't know, shutting down illegal card clubs, and who cares? Gambling tends to come with some problems that, I'll say that I lived in Panama for 5 years. Gambling's legal there. The things that occur surrounding gambling houses are not things that you want to encourage it to occur. As far as prostitution, So to me, the reason I said no to that is because of the word legalization.
Yeah.
Decriminalization, sure. Legalization, no.
Yeah.
Because legalization does two things that I have a problem with. Number one, it gives the state a profit motive in prostitution. Number two, it puts the onus for what most legalization regimes worldwide do is put the onus is treat women in sex work as disease vectors rather than as workers. So, for example, in Holland and Germany and in the U.S. when they had, red light districts in the past in Boston and New Orleans and blah, 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 what they ended up doing was ghettoizing these areas, turning the women who work inside these areas into it's about consumer protection rather than about worker protection, and that's completely unacceptable. Treating human beings like disease vectors, having the state intrude upon their bodies and force testing and all this stuff on them. No sex worker that I know is for legalization and regulation, but most of them support decriminalization. And decriminalization would do a couple of things. Number one, it would stop the situation where a sex worker is afraid to go to the police for help when she's raped because she's afraid she's going to be busted for prostitution. That's the other thing. Like for the women who are in prostitution out of necessity, out of the coercion of poverty, it is absolutely immoral and unethical to punish them twice for being in that situation. That's total. So I'm for decriminalization, not for legalization.
Yeah.
So that was my main qualification. So,
thank you, Stacy. I've learned so much just by listening to you. Thank you.
I think that's understandable, having that classification difference. I think the real goal that we're trying to have here is that the women that are in these industries have the protection to be able to report if things are going wrong for them, rather than fearing that by reporting that they are working as a prostitute, that they are potentially facing penal consequences. I would disagree, obviously, in terms of gambling. I think there is partially a freedom aspect to that. It is just another type of transaction like we are doing when it comes to investing in the stock market. That is another form of gambling that we are expecting that the value is not being recognized currently. And so I believe if any two parties are consenting to a transaction, they should be allowed to do that. Similarly, the same thing goes for drugs, too. If you're not harming others through the transaction that you're doing, you should have that ability to do that to your own body, to make that decision for yourself. So I tend to have that little bit of a libertarian slant, too, that if these people are doing something that's for themselves and it's not harming others necessarily, that action itself shouldn't be penalized. So I totally agree with you, though. There is definitely room for debate on legalization versus decriminalization of prostitution, too. So now I want to go to my third and final question. And I have some predictions of which answer here is going to be picked, given this being a Yang audience here. But I want to give it anyway. So the question I've posed so far to all of my groups that I'm going to be asking for this women's issue is, would you prefer a federal jobs guarantee paying a $37,000 in total compensation? Would you rather have universal basic income of $1,000 a month? Or would you rather have a maximum compensation ratio of 100 to 1 for all businesses doing business in America? So this time I'll start with Stacy on this one. Stacy, which of those three do you find the most promising to prioritize?
Obviously UBI, but I definitely like the 100 to 1 to me is too high of a ratio. So my deal with this is this. I don't, Andrew Yang said, if you agree with me on everything, that's kind of weird. I'm still with people like Elizabeth Warren and with Bernie Sanders on the fact that we shouldn't have billionaires while people are starving. So yes, I think UBI would be the quickest, silver bullet for all of that. But at the same time, we do need to address the fact that our economic system is set up in such a way that we're basically back in the 20s again, as far as income inequality. So, and I also would like to see the marginal tax rate increase massively, which Yang won't even talk about, but
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with you there. And I think you're absolutely right that we need to be talking more than just the wealth inequality that UBI kind of helps with. but also
Yeah.
that income inequality as well. With
Yeah.
that said, just between those three, where do you fall? The federal jobs guarantee, the UBI, or the compensation ratio?
Yeah, I'm with UBI and all taxes that impact, like Yang said one time, and like any taxes that impact the ability for people to work or something like that, that decentivize work. But that's a whole nother topic. So again, that's more libertarian talk, I suppose.
Okay, and how about you, Maria? Are you, again, like the rest of Yang, going with the UBI, or are the other two more enticing for you?
I think UBI is like the most representative of his larger platform, which is like de-incentivize harm, like de-incentivize doing harm. Like honestly, just like we have like we, it's literally like I mean like I had that one tweet about like Monsters Inc. that like a lot of people saw for some reason. That was like like at the end of Monsters Inc. when like they realized that laughter is better than like screaming if you want like to like generate power. It's literally like the same thing. It's like I mean like he says, like it's like you're fighting against the way that the brain is wired, especially like today.
Yeah. No, I tend to have to agree with all three of you. I think the reason why I choose UBI over something like the maximum compensation ratio, which was talked about as potentially desirable here, is I think the real philosophy of what we need to be doing is helping to elevate people up from a level of base poverty rather than just trying to drag people down. We want to try and move away from the zero-sum game. So as long as these people are doing well and have the tools to have basic survival as well as the tools to thrive if they work hard enough or have the right ideas to do so, I think it's really important. And I think UBI is particularly ingenious in how we can start incentivizing a more human-focused economy, because it's a way where you can actually put taxes on something to make them cost what their real cost is, rather than having those externalities go to us, such as he's talked about with meat, with the carbon tax, with the Amazon not paying anything while they automate away jobs. We can take all those, put the taxes on. Yeah, things are going to be a little bit more expensive for us, but then we redistribute that wealth right back to us so we don't feel the actual pain of that incentive. So I think that's really an ingenious way. With that being said, I want to thank all three of you again for coming on today. It was a real treat to have all of you on and to be able to discuss Andrew Yang as well as women's issues. With that being said, I want to give each of you a chance to be able to plug some final thoughts that you have that you want the Rosebuds out there to know about. So with that being said, Jess, is there anything you want the Rosebuds to hear that you have going on in your life or that they should be going and looking up now?
Not really. I mean, you can just find me at my website, which is super simple, thejessallen.com. It's like that's connect with me on social, because that's really how we move things forward, is that we have to connect. I mean, I've learned a lot just by being following Stacey on Twitter. She had a post on there the other day that said something like, over 50% of women vote in the primary. And it's a really important time. I think that was you, Stacey. Yeah. And so that was like a real wake-up call, like, wow, we really have to get, women mobilized. So I think just connecting on social media and really getting involved in the conversation, other than let's go and get Andrew into the White House.
No, I think that's exactly right. Those 2 points, first of all, being able to connect with each other on these social platforms really helps to expose us to perspectives we didn't have or information that we didn't have beforehand. And then it's even more so important that we can have these kind of long-form conversations so that we're not just getting these, 280-character tweets at a time digesting. We can really get into these issues and really understand our tones and where we really feel on these issues. Because as much as we all want to be high and analytical, there is still this feeling that has to come through politics and where people are really coming from. So again, I am so thankful you came on today just to be able to talk about some of those things. Maria, is there anything you wanted to let the Rosebuds out there know that you have going on or that they should be looking up?
Who's to say? I don't know. Follow me on Twitter at GariaMaray. Like I said, I think I literally said this at the beginning of this, but like the woman who has mariagray.com, like the website is super ugly. So my website is mariagray.com with 3 I's. That was the first thing I thought of. I'll probably change it to something cooler. at some point when I am cooler. Yeah, I don't know. Word.
Well, we thought you were plenty cool today, Maria, and we were really thankful to have you on. And all of these links that they're talking about, you'll be able to find these in the description section below. So don't feel like you have to learn how to spell these things. Remember how many there are. We got you covered for that. With that being said, Stacy, is there anything you want to let the Rosebuds out there know that you have going on or that they should be looking up?
Yeah, so as Jess alluded to, in 2018, I'm a dork. I studied voter demo charts, so anyway, in 2018, women were 55% of primary voter. 55% of voters in the midterms. People are projecting that number is going to be higher in this primary, so it is pretty important that we recruit women to vote for Yang. So that's kind of our entire goal with Women for Yang. If anybody's interested in participating in that in any way, basically all of our assets are linked to from womenforyang.com. So we have our own donate link, we have our Facebook page, we have our Twitter page, our Instagram page, my Medium page, a contact form where you can join the group to get in our Slack, all that. But it's all on womenforyang.com, so yeah.
Yes, everyone should go check that out, and I highly agree with you that we do need to be cognizant of who the actual demographics that are showing up in these elections are, because our messaging needs to be able to reach them specifically. And so that's part of the reason why we've had today's episode, as well as some of these other ones, is we really want to invite women into the conversation that progressives are really having, so that we can all, unite together towards a common goal. Because right now, if we don't do that, we're going to have similar results to what we had in 2016, where 53% of white women went to Trump. So we really need to be talking specifically to these groups that are some of the power deciders in these elections. And that is definitely women, as the trends have been showing. With that being said, I want to give some final plugs that we have here going on our channel. So as you'll know, we had our recent episode with the Marianne Williamson supporters, and soon after, we're going to be having an episode with Tulsi supporters on this similar topic. So please make sure that you check out both of those episodes as well. We're hoping to get some of the other candidates, supporters also talking with us, but they're just less fun sometimes, so they don't have to volunteer. So I'm very happy that we have...
You're not going to have a Women for Sire episode?
Do they exist?
Who is white?
Yeah,
is he even married? I don't know.
But that being said, we hope to have more conversations like that if they do happen to hear this and they do want the opportunity to talk about why their candidate is best for them. And then furthermore, we're going to have some important announcements that are coming in November. We've already been starting to collect some volunteers for the upcoming campaign we're going to be running here for New Jersey. So I highly encourage you, if you know anyone in that area, to please reach out. We have a form that will also be included below so that whether you're in my district or not, you can get involved in this movement as well. With that being said, I want to thank you all for coming in and tuning into this episode again. And until next time, Rosebuds, stay rosy.